Hey everybody, Larry Bailey here. I want to talk today about workflow. It is the namesake of one of my company's Mortgage Workflow Partners. And the reason why I want to talk about it today is because workflow is all around us. And I don't think that there's ever a time where it's not a good idea to focus on your workflow. When I came across this concept, it was actually back in 2011 when I started working for Ellie Mae at the time as an implementation project manager. I was the guy that you got handed off to after you signed your contracts with Ellie Mae at the time to purchase Encompass. And first thing I would always ask clients is, well, what's your documented workflow? And really maybe one or two times out of 20 or 30, somebody would say, oh, here it is, Larry. Even more so for those that actually had a current workflow, I think I might have had one in a year and a half, and that's hundreds of projects. So since then, really, anytime I get involved with a project or even just a problem, even if it's within my own company, I sit down and say, well, what are we supposed to be doing? What are we doing as an organization? How are we getting the thing that we're supposed to be worrying about, and what are we doing to it? And then how are we delivering it to the next party who has to take responsibility for it? That's workflow. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because when we do a workflow analysis for a company, we actually sit down and interview each department by department. And the reason why I wanted to share this with you this morning is because you can do that too. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you actually have a problem being that close to it, especially if you know the person. So what ends up happening a lot of times is you sit down with somebody and you're like, okay, Johnny or Jane, whoever it is, tell me what you do. And they look at you like, dude, you know what I do. And that's usually the problem. So that's why a lot of companies end up hiring myself or one of my team members to go out and actually do a workflow interview. And it's just that. It's just sitting there and saying, okay, when's the first time you touched the file? When's the last time you touched the file? And what happens throughout the process in between? And the answers to the questions are what really is important during that process. You actually have to understand what is possible and what should be happening. And so for me, I have an advantage that a lot of people don't, which is that I actually have worked in every position in the mortgage operations over the last 31 years. So you might not have that perspective. You might not have that set of skill sets, and that's expected. That's totally normal. It is very unusual for somebody to actually have worked in every position. But if you really want to know what's happening in your department for wherever you're interviewing, you have to go there and watch. You have to go there and look. And what's really important, if you don't have the true knowledge of what should be happening, reach out to your peers in the industry, reach out to others who might be in similar positions or similar jobs and say, how do you get this done? What is it that you do? So that's part one. Part two is actually understanding what's possible. So when you go through, again, because I've worked in Encompass for 20 years and I worked in mortgage banking for over 30, as well as the banking industry prior to that. And because of my accounting background and finance background, I understand what really should be happening, what's possible, what's practical, those kinds of things. And so when you're doing these workflow reviews, a lot of the information I pull out isn't necessarily something that you would normally be aware of. It is really something about understanding the mortgage industry and what best practices might be. So what I recommend for you is when you have your departments and you're trying to understand to find those efficiencies, you need to make sure that, number one, the person doing the interview not only understands what's possible and practical, but also understands what's appropriate for your company. So a good example, we recently completed a workflow review for an underwriting team at a mid-sized IMB. And so when I went through and did the review, the 20 things I named, we interviewed for about an hour with the underwriting manager who does underwrite files. And I had a preset of expectations for what I was expecting to hear. Some of it I didn't hear, some of it I did, but the results were focused around what is possible. That company happened to be using Encompass. So what is possible within their workflow, what is practical within the workflow, and also what is possible within their technology suite. So in their case, again, they're using Encompass, they're using some other software as well. But I named 20 items for them to go back to the decision tree to make sure that they understand exactly about things that they should be considering to do, and then a few things that they absolutely have to do. And that's what's the big takeaway here is you need to, when you do the review, make your list, your checklist, and then do something about it. A lot of times companies hire third parties or even internal parties to do these health checks, and they don't actually do the work that they're supposed to do. So to sum all this up, make sure that, number one, you're actually doing workflow reviews consistently throughout the year, preferably at least once a year, because the business does change rapidly and companies do change rapidly. So once a year per department is a great idea. Number two, make a list. Make sure that when you're doing this review, you have clear takeaways, even if there's only one thing, clear takeaway. And then number three, make sure that you actually do the work. So don't just start something and then get distracted. Commit to getting this done, and then rinse and repeat. Do it every cycle. Again, typically I recommend once a year, just to make sure you're keeping up to date. Again, technology changes, the industry changes, your business changes. And if there's ever anything I can certainly do to give you advice or give you help, find me over at mortgage.community and post a question. Join a live session every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern and ask questions there. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.